had his hand up for absolutely ages.
It's
Walter,
fine.
so
No worries. Thank you. Thank you for this absolutely timely discussion. It's very pertinent. And thank you for letting me speak. I personally, as a Ukrainian, I am from Ukraine currently. I do live in New York City for 2 years. Um, so I believe I have like a unique perspective of on things that are currently unveiling in Ukraine. I just want to share with you a few like issues, key issues, maybe ask a question. So basically, let's just kickstart with the basic terminology and ideas and get this straight. Russia wages war of aggression on Ukraine, and this war started in 2014. But this was just the kinetic war that started. In 2014, Russia occupied Ukrainian Crimea, staged a fake referendum under the gun barrel, then it insinuated and organized special forces intrusion via assets like Igor Strelkov or Igor Girkin and Bezler into eastern Ukraine to basically kickstart a war in there because the populace in eastern Ukraine wasn't ready for war. And then Russia invaded eastern Ukraine with tank columns and battalion tactical groups when Ukrainian army regained its footing, basically, and started to push Russians back. So at this point, war of aggression that Russia wages on Ukraine, it has been on for 8 years. And nowadays, Russia just wants to invade Ukraine once again, probably from new directions. But even this is not the key issue. The key issue here is that we are in disinformation war. Russia wages disinformation warfare, and the great example of disinformation warfare is this exact space. Unfortunately, we are seeing a situation when complete nonsense and preposterous ideas about Ukrainian history, about Russian connection to Ukraine, are being pushed upon a gullible audience. And I can go back and forth and disprove every single point that you provided us with, because again, these are false. Starting from Crimea, and by the way, why don't you discuss the indigenous Crimean Tatar population who were initially deported in Soviet Union, and when Ukraine regained its independence in 1991, they came back from deportation in Kazakhstan, and they were absolutely pro-Ukrainian and they supported Ukraine. And now when Russia occupied Crimea back, they're pushing these indigenous people and other Ukrainians who are in Crimea and Russian-speaking population of Crimea who are pro-Ukrainian. Unfortunately, under Russian occupation, this huge chunk of population became internally displaced. They had to leave, to flee towards the Ukrainian mainland. And they didn't have a chance to participate in this fake referendum that Russia staged after the Russian invasion under the gun barrel. Pushing on, you mentioned that Ukraine was not an independent state. Oh man, this is like a preposterous notice. You have to double check your history and your history knowledge. Ukraine was an independent state. It proclaimed its independence in 1918 as Ukrainian National Republic. It was an independent state. And then it got invaded by Bolshevik Russia. And there were multiple wars. And unfortunately, Ukraine as independent state was occupied by Soviet Russia. So current Ukrainian independence is basically a renewed independence that was lost after the First World War. So this another point of Russian disinformation campaign is being waged upon all of us. We have to be extremely aware of that because Russia basically brainwashes you. They utilize the basically Russian agents who pretend to be knowledgeable, and they push this Russian agenda into gullible people's heads. And you have to be really aware, because information warfare is being waged upon us right here in the US and everywhere in the world. And unfortunately for Ukraine, who fights for its existence literally in a war of attrition against Russia for 8 years already, nowadays it is being threatened in a basically possibility of complete annihilation, because Russia accumulated forces all over Ukraine. It's poised to attack. It's probably gonna stage various false flag attacks and tries to create a fake pretext to a new invasion of Ukraine, this time from multiple directions and multiple axes, in particular from Belarus, which is basically occupied by Russian forces, because 41st Russian Combined Arms Army is being stationed in Belarus. And just north of Ukraine, we have 20th Combined Arms Russian huge army and 1st Russian tank army. Everything is poised to invade Ukraine. But again, prior to that, Russia already engages aggressively with disinformation campaign. They brainwash all of you. They utilize the Russian assets who align themselves with Russian propaganda, speaking points, and they push this bullshit into your heads. So filter this again. And again, in regards of Minsk agreements, this was an utter and complete nonsense, everything that he said, because Ukraine was the one who aligned itself and completed pretty much everything that Minsk agreement was, trying to implement. Ukraine implemented Minsk agreement, and Russia instead, who is a part of Minsk negotiation process and also is a part of trilateral contact group between Russia as an aggressor, Ukraine as a defensive side, and also OSCE. Russia instead, it completely violated Minsk agreements, as well as Russia violated Budapest Memorandum of 1994, which said that Russia will never attack Ukraine. It did attack. And now it also violates Minsk agreements, because according to Minsk agreements, Russia has to remove all the troops that are currently stationed and wage war upon Ukraine from eastern Ukraine and Russian occupied eastern Ukrainian territories. This is the fact. Also, according to Minsk agreement, Russia has to give back Ukraine control of the Ukrainian Russian border. This is not done. Russian proxies under control of Russian military are sitting in the Ukrainian occupied areas of Luhansk and Donetsk. And for 8 years, they wage this war under a fake pretext of so-called separatists or so-called fake rebels, which are nothing else but Russian army in disguise. This is also a key point of Russian disinformation. And nowadays, it's like a complete BS that being poured via Twitter spaces, via fake no-name accounts, and also like some kind of aka knowledgeable people who pour into your heads, and gullible probably unfortunately gullible heads, because you have limited knowledge of Ukrainian history and situation. They pour these absolutely 100% Russian propaganda ideas. This is the disinformation war that we are in. So please, everyone, focus on one single point. The world has to react. World has to help Ukraine, because the democracy is at stake. The freedom is at stake. So everything that the United States was based upon, our founding fathers, everything that US was built upon, literally the same thing is happening. It's very pertinent in Ukraine. Ukrainians fought for freedom. They fought against corruption in Ukrainian revolution of dignity. It wasn't just Euromaidan. In Ukraine, we call it revolution of dignity. And Russia and Russian propaganda, instead, they try to tarnish it. And they, create this fake ideas that this was some kind of a CIA coup or other BS. It's complete nonsense. I have spent 3 months of my life on Euromaidan. I've seen people killed. I've seen people killed by Berkut police, and I've seen people killed by Russian snipers who helped Berkut police. This is the truth. This is something that Russian propaganda and Russian assets try to, deny and pretend that this was.
Oh, Walter, are you still there? Walter, can you hear me? We've completely lost you. Look, while we're waiting for Walter, look, very grateful for Walter coming on here, actually. It's very interesting to get a perspective of somebody who has very close links to Ukraine and is indeed Ukrainian. He's reconnecting now. So I hope, he seems to have disappeared altogether. That's a shame. I hope he can come back because I'm very interested to talk more with Walter, and I'm very grateful for him to be there. Walter, you seem to be back.
Yes, I'm back. Thank you for actually letting me speak. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, I was just saying while you were away, look, we're really grateful. And I think I might disagree with you on a few points, but it's very important that you get
emotional again, because
no, that's absolutely fine. Look, it's your country and it's understandable.
And it's not just my country. United States is also my country. I live here. I am a permanent resident. I have lots of friends, American friends, but a lot of my family and a lot of my friends of 30 years of my life and my professional advancement in the medical field and everything, they are in Ukraine. I have a field surgeon who is basically in Bakhmut, who saves the lives of Ukrainian soldiers who are being killed by Russians. I have friends in the trench lines. I also have friends who are currently in Kyiv, and they are afraid, and they're basically getting themselves up ready to fight this probably Russian new invasion. And again, the key point, the Russian disinformation campaign. We are, and all of you are being targeted by Russian disinformation campaign. So I can address every point that you would like to throw at me. Please hit me.
Well, okay, thank you, Walter. And I'll say again, we're extremely grateful for this. I suppose the first question that I would like to ask you is that on a few occasions, I think you would agree, in the early 1990s, Crimea made some attempts to gain some kind of autonomy. Now, is there some kind of settlement that Ukraine as an independent and sovereign nation could reach with those regions with significant ethnic Russian and linguistically Russian minorities, where they would gain some kind of autonomy, but within the Ukrainian state? For instance, in the same way that perhaps Scotland has quite a great deal of autonomy within the United Kingdom, or Catalonia has quite a great deal of autonomy, or even going a little bit farther with a kind of a Swiss constitutional system where you might have cantons where, where places like Lviv in the northwest of Ukraine might have very different, perspective on the world to somebody in Lugansk or in Donetsk or in Crimea, for example. Do you feel, and I know passions are running high at the moment, and perhaps this is the wrong time to ask you this question when things look on the verge of war, but do you think there's any prospect of any kind of settlement where perhaps Russia could be happy, some of the, the Russian population in Ukraine could be happy, and perhaps, you folks with a greater sense of Ukrainian nationalism, might not feel 100% happy, but you could live with it?
I get your point. These are very cogent, salient points. But one should understand that, yes, obviously, I agree wholeheartedly that war is not the answer. Ukraine has been at war with Russia again for 8 long years. We have lost 14,000 people, Ukrainians, fighting Russians in eastern Ukraine. So, and lots of internally displaced people, around 2 million people were internally displaced. And in regards of the resolution of this conflict, one should understand one key point, the rights and, sovereignty and independence of country, of Ukrainian country, of Ukraine, independent Ukraine, or any other country cannot be infringed in any way by some kind of, even peaceful resolution. So we should start resolving the key issues here, but we should start from deoccupying by Russia eastern Ukrainian territories, by removing Russian troops who sit in there on Russian occupied eastern Ukrainian territories and wage war on Ukrainian defenders. This is number one. We should start from deoccupying Crimea and removing Russian troops who are.
Oh dear, we seem to have lost Walter again. Look, while we're waiting for Walter, I'm going to ask Don't Eat Pangolins, who's had his hand up for ages. And then I think we might have another Ukrainian given the text. So I would just like to ask Don't Eat Pangolins, please, sir.
So, and I know he's not here now, but I would just like to say maybe whenever Walter returns, I mean, I think that was a very important contribution. I see you've returned, Walter, and I know that your emotions are running high at the moment.
I was wrapping up. Can I have
reasons.
1 more minute? I'm done.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's better. Please go ahead.
Yeah,
sure, Walter, and also maybe you'll let Don't Eat Pangolin speak to you, because he's from Northern Ireland, which is another place of the world which has had difficulty. So please wrap up, and then we'll let Don't Eat Pangolins come back, sir.
I'm all ears. Let me just finish what I wanted to say. Yes, the peaceful resolution is the option, but to resolve it peacefully, Crimea has to be deoccupied. Eastern Ukraine has to be deoccupied. Russia has to de-escalate, dial down the tensions, and also stop basically waging war on Ukraine. And the key point here is Crimea and how Crimea will move on. The key point is upon people in Crimea, in particular those displaced people and those who are in Crimea and whose voices are currently stifled.
Oh dear, we seem to have lost Walter again. Don't Eat Pangolins, please, sir.
I might wait for him to return. I just had a couple of things that I want to get the opinion, especially of any Ukrainians in the audience. So at the moment, it appears to me. Walter, you're back. Do you want to finish your point? And
I'll like 20 seconds and I'm done. So basically, the point is deoccupy Crimea. Russian forces should deoccupy Crimea. Russian forces should deoccupy Donbass and adhere to the Minsk agreements, which Russia violates currently, and I explained to you why it does. And then we should, ask Crimean people and indigenous Crimean Tatar population, who are majority of people in Crimea and whose voices are stifled, but the sentiment is pro-Ukrainian. And also we should ask, all those internally displaced people who had to flee Crimea, but they are willing to come back to their homeland, but now they live in Ukraine. And then we can make a, internationally recognized referendum, and maybe we can ask every single person what is their opinion is. Only upon these conditions, when Russian troops are removed and so-called fake referendums are not being held under gun barrels. That's number one key point. The second key point is about the Russian sentiment in Ukraine. This is complete BS and nonsense, because those people who volunteered initially to fight back Russian forces, they were Russian-speaking Ukrainians from cities like Donetsk, cities from like Luhansk, Sloviansk, from Kharkiv, from Dnipro and Zaporizhia. And I have Russian-speaking friends, Ukrainians who...
Oh dear, we've lost him again. Look, I've also got somebody here, I guess Ukrainian, given that he's not in Latin letters, but I suspect his name is something like Arseny, something like that.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Colin, for letting me speak. I'll be very brief. You also, yeah, you correctly pronounced my name. So I'm also Ukrainian. I just actually, you asked a really good question, and I wanted to actually answer it because, well, I agree 100% with Walter's point, but on your question about peaceful resolution guaranteeing some sort of, yeah, guarantees for the ethnic Russians in Crimea, why your question is really good is you that because it actually like illustrates 100% like how Russian disinformation lands easily into the Western audiences. Because you'll be surprised to find out that under Ukrainian constitution since 1996, since how it was originally drafted, Crimea was an autonomous state under the Ukrainian constitution. So they did, in fact, did have all those guarantees. They had their own parliament. There were always like political tensions, of course, like how to like govern, how to like be autonomous, but in no way have they ever been like oppressed, as the propaganda suggests there, to such an extent that in reality, lots of those ethnic Russians could go through their everyday lives without actually understanding Ukrainian at all. So they were like, so it was Russian was suppressed there so much that actually like they were able like to go by without ever learning Ukrainian. Like if you have, I can see like there are other Ukrainians in this chat. Like if you ask them, probably most of them like will have those experiences when they travel to Crimea. They were actually like would encounter like local there who would not understand them if you spoke to them in Ukrainian. So that just like speaks about this point about the propaganda and again like how effective those yeah like peaceful resolutions and trying to accommodate Russian requests can be. So that's it from
So
me.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I mean either you or Walter might answer this question. I remember.
Go ahead. Any questions? We are good to answer.
While Collingwood, whatever, I think while he's resolving his speaker issue, I've just got a couple of, and thank you both very much for this. I understand this is probably quite painful for the pair of you, so really appreciate that, and I really appreciate your perspective on it. But I have a couple of things I'd like to posit to you. So firstly, it doesn't appear to me at the moment that there is either any Western will nor even ability to intervene in Ukraine at the moment. I think that since the aftermath of Afghanistan is that any such interventions appear to be completely exhausted. So, with that in mind, what would you expect and for instance, Britain doesn't have a military capable of intervening in this at all. The only one that could do it is the United States, and at the moment they are in a posture which leads me to believe that they have absolutely no interest or capability of doing this at this time. So in light of that, what do you think should be the response from the Western world? So
can I try?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll be short and then I'll give Arseny a chance, obviously. Ukraine never requested per se American boots on the ground. Ukraine never requested per se NATO boots on the ground. Ukrainians are willing to fight for themselves, and they have proven their will to fight during the 8 years of war that Russia wages on Ukraine. This is the obvious fact. Ukraine requests help in a form of weaponry, in a form of anti-air defenses, in a form of saturation with anti-tank forces. 2,000 of these MBT LAW systems that were dropped by Britain, great contribution, but we need way more, because amount of Russian armor is incredible. It's amassed like pretty much the complete Russian army around Ukrainian borders. And also the key issue is the anti-air defenses. Ukraine has the capacity and has the expertise to operate even advanced anti-air assets. Ukraine has S-300 systems. They were modernized. Ukraine has OSA systems, a jack of all trades, a very capable system. It was also modernized, and Ukraine has expertise in operating basically Soviet copies of Stinger manpads, Iglas. We all have that, but the number is low. We need more. Ukraine has to be saturated with them. This is the help that Ukraine requests urgently because the time is running out. This is number one. Yeah, basically, key point here, Ukraine will fight. Ukrainians will fight for ourselves. We have shown this. Russian-speaking Ukrainians are willing to fight for their homeland in eastern Ukraine. They have proven this because they fought against the Russian special forces who kickstarted the war, who fomented war in 2014. It wasn't the popular support. The Eastern Ukrainian population, as you frame it, ethnically Russian, you're also like not correct here, because the population, you have to resort to the basic polls. Prior to 2014, there were only 4% of people who voted for a Russian bloc. The Russian bloc was a sole unique party that was basically promoting the idea of so-called unification with Russia. In Donbass, in eastern Ukraine, in Donetsk and Luhansk, only 4%, that's a fact. 4% of people voted for that idea. The rest, they didn't want war. Russia infiltrated with special forces, and you know how special forces act. They recruit local marginalized elements, fringe elements. Maybe you can check videos, drunkards, and basically junkies were recruited, the marginalized citizens, and they were basically used to create this fake pretext or fake image of so-called separatist force. This is untrue, because the backbone of this initial Russian invasion was the FSB forces that infiltrated Ukraine, because Ukraine, after Euromaidan and decapitation of Ukrainian army command under Yanukovych, was basically losing the control of eastern borders. And why did that happen? Because Yanukovych had close ties with Russia, and he instated basically top Russian citizens under Yanukovych, because of Yanukovych, were put in control of Ukrainian military. That's why in this short window, right after Euromaidan, right after Revolution of Dignity, Ukraine kind of had to regain its footing, and army was having problems. But the volunteers helped, and the volunteers, again, were Russian-speaking, majority of them, and they were coming to defend their homeland, Donetsk, Luhansk, Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Kharkiv, and many other cities. So this is the fact. This is something that Russian propaganda tries to omit, kind of basically wages war of this disinformation upon you. They bring up this preposterous idea of ethnically Russians who want to be joined with Russia. This is all BS, complete BS. Nowadays, actually, after Russia occupied eastern Ukraine, the front line has been established after 2 years of kinetic war in 2014 and 15, after battles of Ilovaisk and Debaltsevo, where Ukrainian defenders fought bravely against Russian troops and Russian divisions, Russian tanks and Russian artillery. Basically, Russia put everything it had against Ukraine at that point, everything but the Russian Air Force. But Ukraine stood its ground, with the help with the volunteers from local guys, local Russian-speaking Ukrainians who fought bravely, and they stabilized the front line during the Minsk agreements. And basically, this is the current situation, so-called frozen conflict. But every day we have a shelling. Every day Russia tries to escalate. Every day Russia utilizes electronic warfare, sniper groups with advanced weaponry. They kill Ukrainian forces. So this is the problem also. But again, Ukrainians are willing, and they have proven themselves willing to fight for their own Eastern Ukrainian home. And we just need help. We need weapons. My friends in the Eastern Ukraine, they also request weaponry, anti-tank weaponry, more, because saturation is the key. If Russia throws everything that it has, it will be a massacre. So Ukraine, all of Ukraine is willing to fight. According to the poll, 60% of Ukrainians, official poll, 60% of Ukrainians, they are willing to pick up arms and fight Russian aggression. Please help Ukraine. Saturate Ukraine with weaponry, saturate Ukraine with anti-air defenses, the expertise in operating these systems is there. Ukraine is willing to fight, and Ukraine is willing to fight, most importantly, for its freedom, for freedom of its peoples. It doesn't matter what language they speak. This is the fake idea. Every Ukrainian is united around single idea. Ukraine has to remain as an independent country, and Russia wages all kinds of wars. Hybrid war, economic war, warfare,
Walter,
information and disinformation war, and kinetic war. Yep.
Yeah, Walter, I'm kind of struggling to ask questions here because, I can feel, how difficult this situation is for you. And I don't want to be too confrontational. And I don't want, and I'm very conscious of how I would perhaps feel in a similar situation. I'm quite interested to, I'm quite interested to know if there can be some kind of settlement, because I feel, the West can do very little at this stage, and I'm interested in. Yeah, I'm in a position personally where I think it might need very painful compromises, perhaps on both sides, where nobody is particularly happy, but at least then Ukraine can move forward with some kind of peace and stability, which, as far as I can tell, it hasn't had a great deal of.
I'll elaborate slightly on that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then I'd just like to move it on to more of a British perspective, if that's okay, because there's a lot of listeners here from Britain, and
no problem. I'll just wrap up the Ukraine thing, and I think Sani has to speak as well because he was waiting. So 2 minutes and I'm done. For 8 years of war after the Minsk agreement happened and Russia became a part of Minsk agreement and Putin put his own signature.
Okay,
in
but
Russia.
On this, and I hate to interrupt, but on this, to be fair, Walter, I think it's reasonable to say that neither side has fulfilled its end of the Minsk bargain, right? I mean,
incorrect.
I would
incorrect.
Disagree with you.
I disagree as well. You have to read the Minsk agreement and you have to check what Ukraine did and what Russia didn't do. And basically, Ukraine was gradually implementing all points of Minsk agreement. It even made, how do you call those amendments to constitution according to Minsk agreements to decentralize, and also amendment was made to to respect the rights of the indigenous people. So pretty much every single point of Minsk agreement was followed by Ukraine. But there are points that we cannot proceed further because Russia basically wages war and it cannot fulfill Minsk agreement and doesn't want to fulfill Minsk agreement because it doesn't retract the troops that are sitting in there in eastern Ukraine and pretend to be local separatists and other preposterous idea that Russia tries to push onto all of us. So my key point, again, 1 minute and I'm done. The thing with the Minsk agreement and the war that was lasting for the last 6 years after the kinetic wars stopped and it became a stable front line, Russia tried to utilize Minsk agreement and kind of superimpose itself or substitute itself within Minsk agreements with the fake separatists, Russian puppets, which are called DPR, LPR, whatever Russia calls them. These are 100% Russian created, Russian engendered entities that are Russian controlled. They are controlling local Russian military, local Russian army, and the Russian government organizes everything else. But it can he tries to pretend that it's not involved. So Russian idea within Minsk, the convoluted version of Minsk that Russia tries to impose on us, despite it signed the original agreement. The idea that Russia tries to impose on us, that Russia disengages from Minsk, it substitutes itself with these Russian-controlled entities, and it will try to push these entities whilst they are under complete Russian control. Russia will try to push them back into Ukraine, reincorporate them, and again only on convoluted Russian terms, and therefore Russia will be able to completely destabilize Ukraine from within. They will, try to send the MPs to Ukrainian parliament, basically, who are Russian terrorists or Russian proxies. They will instigate more war within Ukraine. This is the key point. Russia tries to destabilize Ukraine from within, either via this diplomatic route, when it coerces or imposes upon everyone this convoluted fake version of fake interpretation, Russian interpretation, incorrect interpretation of Minsk agreements, and therefore will be able to destabilize ruin Ukraine from within. Or if it's not able to do that, and it wasn't able for 6 years because Ukraine stood its ground and basically Ukraine adhered to the original version of Minsk agreement that Russia signed and Putin signed. Russia wasn't able to do that. So now it tries to intimidate everyone. It tries to saber rattle. It tries to create the fake ideas of NATO threats. Excuse me, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, half a year ago, there was no NATO threat per se. Russia wasn't running around and screaming about it. Just now, out of the blue, all the hell broke loose. Russia, creates this crisis. It creates intimidation. It creates the troop buildup. It tries to coerce every single Western European nation and United States into this some kind of a convoluted agreement which will infringe Ukrainian independence. And my key point here is, whatever the resolution is, the independence of any sovereign country in Europe or anywhere on the globe should not be compromised in such a way. We should stick to the borders that were approved by international community, and the borders of Ukraine, they also stretch all the way to Crimea and eastern areas of Ukraine. And we should stick to Minsk agreement, the original version of Minsk agreements, and everything should stem from that, not the convoluted Russian version just because Russia wants so, just because Russia tries to intimidate us, just because Russia tries to coerce with its saber rattling and fake created, threats, so-called, or framing itself as if it's threatened. Russia never was threatened. Russia is the threat because
Walter,
Russia wages war.
I really appreciate this. I'm very sorry to cut you short, but I'm going to move on if that's okay. Because
before you do, Collingwood, would you mind if I just asked a couple of follow-up questions? I hope we can deal with them very briefly. If you don't mind.
Yeah, because we've been doing this for 2 hours and 15 minutes already, and I want to kind of get on to the last half hour, what this means to Britain and the situation that Britain's in. So, Walter, if when you answer these questions, we can really try and keep it short, because I know these are passionate times.
I'll try to be as concise as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, Walter, I think we can try and wrap these few up in a couple of minutes. So the first question I have is, so there have been documents that have been released from both British intelligence and the central, from the US diplomatic cables that indicate that in the 90s, that there was a definitive guarantee on the part of the British government and the American government that NATO wouldn't expand an inch. So, I do wonder if perhaps you would think that particular expansion might have put the Russians in a far more aggressive stance than otherwise might have been. And then the second question that I have for you, and I appreciate that for both you and apologies, is it Arseny? That and I really don't want to sound like I'm being too confrontational here. The second question I have is, do you think that given that there is the prospect that Russia now has a direct energy pipeline between itself and Germany, that there's any prospect of any determined or consistent European policy on this that is going to not be influenced by that particular aspect of Russian-German energy policy?
Yeah, and I know those are quite difficult questions, but let's try and keep them concise, please, Walter.
Yeah, I'll be concise. In regards of Nord Stream 2, it should be sanctioned sanctioned as soon as possible, and Russia shouldn't be able to utilize, because it essentially built it to, put pressure upon European Union, and therefore would be able to skip or omit Ukrainian pipeline, which is the economically reasonable one. And, basically Russia at this point has the option to destroy or create a false flag attack on Ukrainian pipeline and further coerce us into activating Nord Stream. Nord Stream should be sanctioned and should not be activated, because it's just another means of Russian war. It's just a tool of Russian war. And in regards of the NATO expansion and Russia being threatened, it's preposterous and completely false. Just think about it logically. How can Russia be threatened per se if Russia wages war of aggression upon independent neighbors? It started wars in Transnistria, it started wars in Abkhazia, in South Ossetia, it invaded Georgia. Now it invaded or insinuated its agents within Kazakhstan and framed it as a peacekeeping nation, which is complete BS. It started wars all over the place. Also, it started wars in Chechnya when it tried to proclaim its independence under Juhar Dudayev, a Chechen president and the hero of Chechnya, widely recognized. And then Russia, presumably being so-called quote-unquote threatened, framing itself as threatened, started a war of aggression, a kinetic war of aggression upon Ukraine. So the idea that Russia is threatened has been just omitted. It's not the case. Russia is the actual threat. And these countries who joined NATO, they joined NATO only because they are afraid of Russia, because they have the example. Russia wages war. Russia wants to impose neo-imperialistic ideas, neo-Nazi, basically, a local Russian version of
Walter, please,
upon everyone else.
We're getting into, as I say, I'll say again, I'm very grateful for your contribution, and I understand that passions are running high, but we really need to keep this, fairly short, otherwise it's to, yeah.
Sorry.
Look, I would say that, to be fair, for example, and I know, you have your perspective on this matter, but for instance, in Georgia, the European Union's own report into the Georgia war said that it was started by the Georgians, and although the Russians applied overwhelming force.
It was a Russian false flag attack that created a fake idea that the Georgians started it.
But yeah, however, as I say, I don't think the European Union really at that time had any desire to take the Russian side on anything, and the European Union was pretty clear in its final report in saying that it was a war that was begun by Georgia. However, I do want to move on to the British perspective for this, because, and I'm sorry to say this, Walter,
no problem,
and you might not be happy with this, but I really don't want Britain personally to have any involvement in this.
And Ukrainians do not request, as I said, nor American boots on the ground, nor British boots on the ground. We request weaponry, and we request anti-air systems and anti-tank systems. Just help us with the weaponry, and we'll do what every independent nation does if it's brave and fights for its own freedom. We will defend ourselves. Just give us help and go along the universal idea of independence and freedom. Freedom is something that unites everyone. Freedom is worth fighting